So good evening, all. It's absolutely a pleasure for us to have you all here for the conversation today, what we call as the India Dialogue Conversations. As you know, it is in continuation to the India Dialogue Summit that we actually had at Stanford early this year. And of course, for next year, we are looking at doing it on February 29 and March 1. So please block it on your calendars. It is going to be one hell of an experience. This time with some amazing sets of speakers who are already coming in. We will have the foreign minister who is going to be joining us. We will have people like the commerce minister and so on and so forth. So we will have some exciting set of people and leaders who are going to be joining that. But today is the day for a conversation with Pranjal. Pranjal is somebody, from my point of view, I've known him for about 15 or 20 years. And of course, as a professional somebody who's been one of the foremost journalists in the country. Like, of course, he's moved away from the journalist's avatar right now, but he started his career with, or in fact, he was editor for Bloomberg. That is how it was. And then he ended up becoming an author and possibly one of the foremost thinkers in the area of economy. And he's recently done a book, which is quite exciting, called The Next New, and navigating the fifth industrial revolution. And today's conversation is all about that. If you've not seen this book, please do have a look at it. This is an amazing book, and I was able to go from first page to the last page, I think in about 3 or 4 hours. I found it so exciting in terms of reading it. So I recommend reading the book to everybody. But Pranjal is somebody who's been speaking at the World Economic Forum and has been working with the forum for many, many years. So, of course, you can accuse him of being a capitalist through and through, but that's a separate debate that we can always have. But Pranjal, thanks a lot for joining us today. It's absolutely a pleasure. So the conversation would be led by Richard and I. As you know, Richard heads the US ATMC. But Pranjal, over to you for a brief presentation, and then we will actually go in for the Q&A. Over to you, Pranjal.
Thank you, Amit, and thanks, Richard, for inviting me. I think this is an exciting subject which has an impact on everybody. Allow me to share my screen, and I will begin right away. I hope you could see it now.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So, there is a lot of questions about, and I'll take less than, I'll take about 10 minutes or less to talk about it. Fourth Industrial Revolution is much talked about, and I published a couple of books on that, but that was mostly focused around India and the emerging economies. But this is about a global shift which is happening across what I call legacy economies as well as growth markets. So both are shifting. This is a shift which is happening across markets, across industries, and happening simultaneously across the world. So let's take a quick look at what the fifth industrial revolution is. Now, the fourth industrial revolution was mostly about the emerging technologies, from IoT to drones to the physical digital world. And that was fairly well established, and it's got permeated across the world in many industries in various at various levels. But now we see a shift where we see 3 different, very distinct megatrends emerging. And what is fascinating today, Richard and Amit, is that they are happening simultaneously. So emerging technologies, as well as the need for planet and sustainability, and people and society. So what we are seeing today is that 3 megatrends are, I could also say, 3 mega forces are applying themselves to business models across industries at the same time. Now, one can always argue that this is not new, which is fair, but what is new is that they're exerting equal force at the same time. So the whole issue of planet and sustainability has been there for a while. Emerging tech has been again making its presence felt. What is new today is people and society. And let me just take you through what I have interpreted in my way, which is that there are 3 ecosystems which are now working simultaneously. ESG, fourth industrial revolution, SDGs is equal to the fifth industrial revolution. How does that work? ESG is broadly represented by the big global funds of the world, who are now demanding that all companies and industries put new norms into place to track their carbon footprint, to track what kind of impact they're having. SDGs is at a multilateral level. It's at the intergovernmental level. Very clear goals have been set. Of course, now there is a talk about the next set of goals. Whether the goals are by themselves adequate or not is always a debate. But the fact is that these three ecosystems, the tech entrepreneurs, which are represented in the fourth industrial revolution, ESG, which is represented by the big funds, and SDGs, which are the multilateral groups, are all coming together to say we need to work on this new industrial revolution in a far more refined and improved way than we've seen so far. I have interpreted this through 5 new economies which I see emerging currently out of this, and the impact of this change is as identified in the book, is a 25 trillion shift in the economy for the next few years, and I'll delineate that. And this is the first book actually to quantify it, and I've got this data from a management consulting firm, Markets and Markets, which were gracious enough to share some of the data with me. Combination of qualitative conversations with business leaders along with this number gives you a very stunning figure that within the next few years, you'll see a creative destruction of business models wherein $25 trillion worth of business is going to crumble and wither away, and the new alternate model is emerging. But let's look at the 5 pillars which we have: subscription economy, blended economy, autonomous, caring economy, and the foundation of that, which is where the rubber literally hits the road, is the talent economy. Subscription economy, as you know, which has become fairly important, is as a service model, continuous value, mass customization and personalization of nearly everything that we see. And again, this is happening not just in legacy economies in Europe and US, but also in the growth markets of Asia. Now, example of this is something like this, where you can nearly get anything as a subscription. So ownership as a concept has really declined, and a lot of the younger folks who may be watching will realize that they all want asset-light existence. Nobody wants to acquire a car or a property or big assets. Everybody wants to use as they go and not necessarily acquire, which means that there is going to be a huge impact on the producers of these products, and therefore their business model will have to go from sale to subscription, and which is again a huge shift. Let's look at the blended economy. And here, I think it's very interesting that the business models are getting a bit homogeneous, but what is fascinating is that geographies and industries are getting interconnected. You can't always say what is a technology company, what is a finance company, what is a telecom company, and nearly every company is now reintroducing itself in a very, very different way. And one great example of this is a company called Schlumberger. Its CEO, the India CEO I met recently. It is now slb.com, and some of you may know about it. So from a very pure oil and gas company, it's become a technology company, because that's what the core of the company is. What is fascinating here is the concept of unexpected competition. Some very obvious examples are where you see competition coming from in a sector coming from a company which was never in that sector. So how are companies going to deal with that? That becomes a huge question. And again, Tesla is a very oft used example of a company which came out of nowhere and became a competition to the global automotive industry. But that is happening across so many different fields at the same time. Today, is a car, is it a automobile, or is it a computer on wheels? It's very difficult to say right now. So therefore, who is going to be the primary producer? It is going to be an organization or an entity which is making the steel body, or the not the ICE engine anymore, definitely, but really the computing system which is going to drive the car. So the car becomes effectively a computer. So the competition for the car companies are not just going to come from EV makers who weren't existing earlier, but maybe any tech company can say, well, I can subcontract the purchase of wheels and the body of the car, but really it's the computer that's going to be driving the car. The autonomous economy is again about increasing automation across sectors. While efficiency and productivity was very important in the fourth industrial revolution, you're also seeing the results of huge amounts of data coming through. And that gives us the concept of where you've seen companies like NVIDIA suddenly becoming so important because from just a gaming company, it's become a company which is at the center of the generative AI revolution, which again has uh, flummoxed a lot of people because you don't know which way and which direction it's going to be headed. I think in my conversations with many technology leaders and CEOs, I found that they also realize that they have accepted that much of the technology being created today, especially from generative AI, is leading to unanticipated results, which means that we don't know, they don't know, and actually even the regulators don't know what's going to happen next. There's a good direction towards it, but I'll come to the part about where the society comes and the regulation comes into the picture. Here is where it all comes together, which is that companies are now have to face these three forces, but they have to realize that planet and people, not just profits, which means that they have to now constantly in every single business decision they make, they have to factor in the importance of the planet, they have to factor in the importance of people, and they have to, of course, make sure that their shareholders are taken care of as well. Now, when we talk about social equity and we talk about SDGs and ESG, one of the examples I can use here is of something where you see the entire conversation around chat GPT and generative AI. I'll probably go back to that and just show you where we are. Now, if you look at the pushback happening from the society, as articulated by uh, local, national, and multilateral regulators, is that we need to control AI. Anything that companies do needs to be looked at from a societal impact. You must have heard that the Secretary General of United Nations just said that we need a global body to regulate AI. Many countries are now demanding that something be done to ensure. It's really like a genie which has come out, but we don't know where it's going to be headed. Uh, Now we come to the fundamental of it. When we talk about automation and we talk about artificial intelligence, it has an impact on people. We've seen that the average tenure of CEOs has reduced. We've seen that the average age of company have reduced. But the fundamental fact is that in this new phase of industrial revolution, we will see a huge impact on talent. And that's fairly visible right now, which means that legacy roles are changing, there are new roles coming up, but at the same time, people are also not as relevant to corporate decision making as they used to be. So we have a situation where everybody has to relearn what they did. A degree that you and I could have got about 20 years ago or 30 years ago is no longer relevant in most ways. So one has to uh, upskill, you have to get fresh ideas about what's going on. And it's fascinating that it's not just about students who are graduating or mid-career professionals. Even the CXOs have to worry about their position because they don't know what the new business model is going to be and therefore what their own role is going to be. These are some of the some of the roles which are emerging, from privacy to wellness to diversity. There are probably 10 more roles which we could talk about, but I will end on the fact that these five economies are the real key shifts which are driving this $25 trillion shift. In my view, until all of us realize what this means, until business leadership realizes that there is going to be a new opportunity being created, uh, which has to be pivoted to, I think there's going to be a fair bit of chaos. But at the end, I think the transition from the fourth to the fifth industrial revolution means that we are going to be in a far more caring atmosphere where companies and regulators and civil society will have to ensure that whatever happens to the shift from here on, it will not be just for the sake of bottom line and improving profits, but keeping the people and planet as a focus as well. So I'll end here, Amit and Richard, and let's take this conversation forward.
Great, Pranjal. This is very exciting in terms of what you're saying. But I have a lot of questions that emerge from this whole shift that you're really talking about. Say, one of the most important ones, like say a country like India, which is possibly right now at the nascent stage of, say, productivity, competitiveness, because there is a lot of ground to cover. Because if you really look at the world outside, especially enterprises outside, they have a very different productivity frontier. When you talk about software, etc., or whatever, across industries. How do you think this would actually have an impact on countries like India at the broader economic level?
Well, I think the best example of a caring economy today, which leverages technology, is happening in India. The whole concept of digital public infrastructure is a concept which hasn't happened at the scale that you see in India, which is how do we've had more than 500 million people who opened bank accounts in the last 5 years. Now, which democracy can say that it has been able to do that leveraging technology? Here, in the context of India, I like to use the phrase not high tech or low tech, but effective tech, which means technology which is going to deliver the needs of a people who were perhaps left behind in the previous industrial revolution, but it is bringing them into the mainstream. It could be the financial mainstream, it could be the healthcare mainstream, it could be the education mainstream. Doing it at scale, doing it in a short period of time, and doing it so that the results are immediately available is an example of what you're saying, Amit, that India has been able to use the DPI framework to deliver in a very interesting collaboration between technology creators, between government as a platform, and the civil society and consumers as very key participants.
That's interesting. So, of course, DPI, when you say digital infrastructure that India has created, that's a very interesting example. But do you think the corporate world is ready for some of the things that you're really saying? Like, so when you say it's going to be subscription economy, a blended economy, autonomous, or caring. So caring, I do understand. That's more at a country level. But are enterprises ready for facing this kind of a change?
I think that they are cognizant of the challenges, but I think it's going to take a while for them to do it. Broadly, because the way most companies are structured, that the leadership is often focused on very quarterly outcomes rather than an annual outcome or a 5-year picture. And the fact is that the pace of change and rapidity is such that I don't think somebody who's between 55 to 65 years old, who's had a 25 to 30-year-old career, has the capability to shift and pivot so quickly. There's a very small percentage of people who are being able to do that. To be able to do that, first you have to comprehend what the changes are. And honestly, for all of us, none of us can claim that we really understand what's going on. Changes are hitting us faster than we can even realize. Let me take the example of the medical devices and instruments industry, which kind of resonates with a lot of people. Until recently, and even now, in many hospitals you go, you have these bunch of small little instruments that check your blood and check your oxygen level, check your heartbeat, etc. Now, a lot of that is now on your wrist in a watch or in an app on a phone. You just have to put your thumb on the screen of a phone, and you get a lot of your basic parameters of your body in place. Think about the companies for the previous few decades who had invested billions of dollars across the world to make those small little instruments, which we kind of took for granted. Now that industry is withering away and everything is getting digitized. Now, what does a company do to survive? They have only one option: to pivot to a completely new way of doing business. And therefore, I gave the example of Schlumberger, but there's several other examples where companies have to say that we are not in the process, in the business of making products, but in the business of offering a service, because the product may not even exist anymore. To answer your question in short, I mean, I don't think companies in India are absolutely ready. Um, there's going to be a huge challenge. And this is the challenge and the transition which is going to create an opportunity, but also create a bit of chaos.
Mhm. So,
The
of course,
transition from navigating these is going to be difficult.
that's interesting, Pranjal, that of course, like we are not ready or whatever, but there is at one end also, like if I really look at the global market itself and with the kind of changes that are happening, and the example that you were giving that there is digitization of health services and so on and so forth, what do we see is that there is this rise of huge ecosystems around which enterprises are getting created. So you might call it as an Apple ecosystem or the Android ecosystem. That is also giving rise to gargantuan enterprises. So is it that in the fifth industrial revolution, you might actually end up seeing that smaller players will actually wither away? It's going to be a large enterprise space thing, or how will competition happen? And that is where the role of regulator will also become hugely important.
Good question, Amit. I think it could go either way. There is the advantage that today's technologies are far more egalitarian than they used to be. So anybody sitting in any part of the world or growth economy in Asia, Latin America, or Africa can create a solution which can go global in days, if not weeks and months. So AI-based solutions can be created by just about anybody, right? You don't have to do it in Silicon Valley anymore. It can be done nearly everywhere. So there is that advantage. But at the same time, the large technology giants have an advantage where they are able to throw more funds and resources into innovation. They have the ability to buy the best ideas the moment there is proof of concept. So I am unsure about where this is heading, but I am sure about one thing, that the whole effort on anti-competition or laws which are antitrust focused, which make sure that there's fair competition, are going to get sharper and sharper and sharper, and the conflict between the industry and regulators is going to become even more shrill. We've seen examples of that happening in Europe. It is happening in US. It's happening in India, where the regulators are extremely, cynical about some of the attempts. There is a deep trust divide, if I may say so, between technology creators and the users at one level, where people just don't know whether to trust a company, and they don't know how soon a company will become monopolistic. So there is the advantage of egalitarian technologies allowing a lot of thousand ideas bloom, but there is also the worry that any one of them can become so big so quickly that we won't know how to control it.
That's absolutely, I'll agree with you on that. Like, but this leads us to an important question on regulation, or creating regulation. Like, if you really look at the past, if you really look at the last 200 years, what we do notice is that regulation has always been slow in terms of catching up or whatever. Industry is always created earlier, and then they try to understand what are the lay of the land. But in case of what you're suggesting, is that the pace of change is so fast that even experts are feeling left behind at points in time, or there could be people who feel left behind. Then how will regulation catch up? Because if you really look at, you did talk about generative AI in your initial comments. Generative AI in itself is one kind of an element, which a lot of people are not even understanding. They don't even know what is going to be the impact for that kind of technology now or in the future, and across different sets of industries. So how do we really get regulators to understand? Because for right functioning of economies, the regulation will have to be playing a very important and a pivotal role.
I think the challenge in a country like India is far more, because this is where the growth market is. This is also the place where you talk about another 500 million people the same way you talk about another 50 people joining the market, right? And these are huge numbers. And while most of the people are digitally literate, at a very basic fundamental level. For them, the excitement of joining the digital mainstream is so high that they're willing to give up. I mean, they don't have concepts of privacy and data security at all. They're just so delighted to be connected. They're just so happy to have a phone with a 5G network or a 4G network that they don't really care about. I mean, the concept of privacy and not sharing information doesn't even exist, which makes the role of the regulator even more critical. So the regulators may not understand the technology, but they can understand or make an effort to understand the end result, the impact. And I think this is where the whole effort and the conflict lies. How do you ensure that the regulators take care of the people who are joining the digital mainstream? And I'm talking about all kinds of vulnerable communities. And honestly, if you look at vulnerable communities, it's not just in a country like India. You may have heard that there are several developed market countries where the concept of e-safety commissioner has been created. Australia has an e-safety commissioner. The Ofcom in UK is now increasingly worried about how do you ensure that vulnerable communities, which could be children who are joining the digital mainstream or the elderly, are protected, because you don't want children to be exposed to harm. You don't want elderly people to be used as fishing bait. In my view, regulators have a very tough time ahead. They may want to err on the side of caution, and that could be at the cost of innovation. But I think that debate is going to be right front and center in every market. How do you regulate technology so that you allow innovation but protect society?
Especially when the technology is developing so quickly. Pranjal, I first want to congratulate you on seeing the big picture. This is one of the best kind of comprehensive views of how the world's economy is proceeding that I've seen. I feel like I'm seeing about 2 years worth of teaching condensed into a 10-minute presentation. Not all of it is guaranteed to go in a positive direction, especially, looking at ESGs plus SDGs. The caring economy is something that, our discussion up to now has focused on how do we help to ensure that things are going in that direction. I want to add one thing to the mix and ask you for your opinion. This is kind of an extension of your concept of the blended economy, because one of the areas of blending is that we are all internationally connected in real time. So there's new possibilities for cooperation, new possibilities for competition. How do you see the best way forward in regard to what people used to call international relations in this kind of situation, especially between the United States and India?
It's interesting you asked, Richard. Thank you for your kind words, though. I think that international relations about 20 years ago, and many of my friends from school and college, when they entered international relation, it was mostly about diplomacy, it was about security, and it was geopolitics, really. The big games between countries. Most of it was territorial and muscle flexing, and of course, Cold War and the concepts of unipolar world which emerged out of that are the key elements of that. It then transitioned to international economic relations, because international relations was nothing without economic strength. Because when you see the rise of China, when you see the rise of the Asian tigers, it was about how the economic heft of Asia or other parts of the world is now competing with the heft of Europe and US. But today it's
unexpected competition in some ways.
Yes. So it's not unexpected, but as you rightly said, the fact is today it's international technology relations. Your army does not decide the power that you wield in the world. I think the drone warfare that we've seen in the previous years has established a new normal, which means that he who has more technology is going to be the leader of the world. And before I come to US and India, I think the US-China relationship is actually playing out in a very interesting way. The war over chips, the war over restriction of creating semiconductors, but it's also about data control and data flows.
Yep.
Because that becomes the biggest power. Now, think of data for 1 billion patients. If it's collected in a common place, anonymized, of course, the brilliant insights that anybody can get out of that, if you or if anybody is a medical researcher, that can help create innovations for our healthcare services, for the pharmaceutical companies. And I showed you an example where many pharmaceutical companies call themselves AI-based companies now, because even clinical trials are happening on algorithms. And there is a concept of a body in a chip, in a sense that all your body parts can be simulated on a chip, and you can test various things. So technology is very critical. What is good today is that, at least between India and US, is that there is a far higher level of exchange of information and technological collaboration. It has helped that both of the countries are democracies. They have a very healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem. We've had fantastic unicorns emerge in the last few years. I can't say all of them are, successful. Of course, some of them will crash and burn for various reasons. But the fact is that there are many similarities between India and US in terms of the tech entrepreneur ecosystems. I think that if India and US were to collaborate far more, things could move from not just AI, but we are seeing collaborations on some core technologies in aerospace, defense, in space. India has taken a lot of interesting steps, Richard, in the last few years to open up the space sector. So a category of space tech startups has come up, and our national space body is now working with, and this is a big shift, because space was seen as a very highly sensitive, secure sector, which you could not allow even other government departments to participate or collaborate with. So I think these shifts are happening, and I'm fairly optimistic about the India-US technology-based relationship, because I think that will drive our equation forward.
Thank you. I think that's a great answer. The emerging commercial space business area is fascinating. One other thing, I think that especially if you think about managers in a company, most of the people I know feel like they're running as fast as they can to stay in the same place. So in the middle of trying to take care of this, do you have any suggestions for them on how they can effectively transition to the new roles and acquire the new kind of awareness and knowledge that they need to get?
Well, I think this is a great debate happening in the Indian industry as well. There are new kinds of roles being created, but at the same time, some of the old dull roles are dying away. And this can happen at the entry level. It can happen at the highest level. So, for example, if there's automation of forex management, then what happens to a financial leader? What happens to people who spend their lifetime in managing forex and hedging risks, which resulted in currency shifts? Now, if that is going to be done by an algorithm, then a person who had specialized in managing forex suddenly finds himself or herself completely irrelevant. Right now, that person has to figure out how to shift within maybe the finance sector to a new role. Or that person may say, look, I'm too old to do something, and therefore that person has to retire. So we will see increasing examples of this. I've also seen that there are, if you talk to anybody in marketing or sales, you will find that an increasing amount of data and multiple metrics of information is coming through. There's a very interesting example I read about where data and weather patterns were used by a company to identify and predict sales. And here, for example, there's a company which will says, well, all right, I sell drinks for the summer, right? But if there is a shift in weather pattern, it makes a difference. But what if you go slightly more macro? Now, it happened in the US there, where some of the smart companies started using weather data to predict their sales. Now, imagine that it didn't used to be the case. I mean, some smart marketing person may have done it earlier, but to do it in an institutionalized, structured way is a new development. So somebody could predict that in a certain state, there's going to be a heat wave, and they made sure that that particular state and that region within the state in US had better stocks of their, their sodas than other states. And that meant also going back and making sure the entire value chain and logistics delivery was reoriented from, let's say, the East Coast to the West Coast. And that allowed the company to harvest a boom, a profit out of those sales, because they use a completely new set of data in their sales algorithm. Now, there are, again, many examples like this where managers will have to figure out new ways of doing business. They'll have to figure out new tools to use, and which means that perhaps their traditional knowledge or what they were used to doing will not be as applicable today. They will literally have to get a far more diverse team, diverse in terms of skills and domain knowledge, to apply themselves to a solution.
Okay, thank you. Amit, over to you.
Sure. Pranjal, we have a couple of questions from the audience, and I'll ask those and then I'll come back to many questions that I have. So Prakash is asking, like, in regard to regulation, how do multilateral institutions treat technology matters, other than in myopic terms of producers and consumers, as happens, for instance, with the global minimum tax or a local storage of information about citizens? So how do you work on these sets of ideas?
Well, I think everybody's approaching it with a lot of anxiety and some level of exasperation. So again, the challenge is that I think many of the regulators are applying old metrics to completely new situation. So looking at consumers, looking at borders, looking at local versus non-local storage, I think those phrases are not going to be very relevant. I mean, if you look at the whole concept of a single digital market, which the European Union has been talking about, it has not really worked because cross-border transactions are still a challenge. In my view, multilateral agencies will go by priority. At this stage, the regulation will be maybe principles at the multilateral level and action and application at a local level. And the application at the local level may be very different in each region, but have some kind of a system where global governance of technology can be done in a way that is flexible enough for local requirements, versus ensuring that certain principles are met. I don't have a comprehensive answer because I think this is an evolving piece. Honestly, I think every regulator at every level is still grappling with this issue. So the question which has been asked is a very valid question, but I don't think any regulator, whether a central bank governor or others, would do it. Now, let's look at the fact that even the concept of cryptocurrency, let's just look at that regulation of cryptocurrency, for example. Central banks across the world are mostly either divided or against the idea of a cryptocurrency replacing or actually being equal to a national currency, simply because of accountability and the question of where does the buck stop. In a sovereign situation, it is a sovereign which says that I guarantee you the value that this paper holds. Now, in case of cryptocurrency, if you were to apply the old concepts, you don't know. There is lack of transparency. You don't know who exactly the owner of the cryptocurrency is. There are several issues which central banks are grappling with. So, to my mind, there will be confusion for a while to come. And as Richard said earlier, the confusion may actually accelerate simply because new products and ideas and tools are happening so fast that sometimes I think even the creators don't know what they have created in the technology space. A concept like central bank digital currency is gaining ground. Now there is, if I can just remind everybody that G20 is happening in India. So one of the key discussions in the G20 gatherings have been to have some kind of a common framework for crypto finance and for technologies like CBDC. We don't know where that's going to head, but you can see that it is top of the mind for the finance ministers of the world, the central bank governors of the world. I think they will really have to work hard to stay ahead of the curve.
Mhm. Fascinating. And Pranjal, like if you really want to go deeper, say like one of the industries which is always accused of being the slowest to change could be the academic world. How do you say your idea that you're saying will change academics? Because when you talk about traditional universities, they are more like codified knowledge and a codified degree or a certificate that you've done something. And then suddenly you are talking about something like a subscription economy or a subscription model. How do you think universities will possibly change? And what kind of impact do you think it will have on knowledge generation, dissemination in places like India, especially?
You know, honestly, I think the US higher education system is perhaps the most flexible and open to change in the world, and I have a lot of respect for that. The other countries don't have education systems, at least at the higher level, where in higher education. So I would say US is best placed to it, and I hope that India can learn more from it. We've had very, very rigid structures, and I can give you a couple of examples. We've had situations when a child graduates from school, he or she could not join science until they had to have a certain combination of physics, chemistry, or maths, and if they dropped any one of them, they were not eligible for a bachelor in technology or science. Some of that is changing. So but if you ask me, my view is that the concept of degrees is pretty much 18th century. We will have to go beyond that, because look at it this way: degree gets frozen in time, right? You do 3 years of something and you come out and you feel you know everything, but by definition you're obsolete the moment you finish the course. Think about the fact that today in July 2023, we are talking about the concept of generative AI, which less than a year ago wasn't even a concept for most of us. Chat GPT as a tool is the highest, fastest growing adoption in the world. 100 million users in less than 60 days, while Instagram took a few months, and before that Facebook, etc., took maybe a few years. But the fact is that if you force and you put education in a framework of the 18th century, in today's world, I don't think that's going to work. I'm not an educationist. I think Richard and you are far better, experienced to comment on that. But my view as a former student and a potential student is that we need to look at learning in a completely different way. I know it sounds like a cliche, but the fact is that a 2-year degree or a 3-year diploma or a 6-month course honestly is not something which is going to help us stay relevant. I like to use the word relevant, which means that each of us as individual and professionals have to make an effort to be relevant. But what happens is that if I want to change my job, and a lot of the people in their 20s and 30s, if they want to change jobs or pivot to a new career, which we referred to earlier, the employer would ask for credentials, and those credentials don't exist. How do you prove credentials to be an expert on generative AI or data science? How many years of experience can you show for that? Is there anybody you can say that, I have a 30-year, expertise in that? Whoever says that I'm an expert on any of the new technologies is either a creator or lying. So there is that fundamental challenge. So again, I don't have an answer, but I think what I know is that education institutions and employers, and I think that's a very important stakeholder, Amit, that you should look at. Employers have to increasingly say that a degree doesn't matter, and aptitude matters, and application matters.
I think you're absolutely right. The aptitude and the application learning skills, the ability to keep flexible and to keep seeing what's new. What do you see as a constant in this? So in all of this great change, do you think that people are changing? And in that regard, I think the other kind of key element besides learning ability is maybe critical thinking. How do people need to polish their critical thinking from this point?
This is a brilliant question, Richard. I was part of a debate a few weeks ago, and again, ChatGPT was at the center of it, and the conversation was, what does a technology tool do to critical thinking, or just our ability to use our brains in a better way? My poser to experts, and they were on two sides, is technology making us dumber? Is it making us lazy? A simple thing like a map, a digital map or a Google map, just makes you depend on it so much that you lose your spatial sense. Before the maps were there, you had to read the signs on the road and just get yourself aware about where you are, and that was the best way. And there was a huge cognitive effort which went on while you were walking down the road driving, because you would recognize a neighborhood, you would recognize a tree or a signboard or a billboard. Our increasing reliance on technology, in my view, has the risk of converting us into slightly lazy people, where we just follow what we see but not always apply our mind to it. That's one part of it. Critical thinking as a tool, that's just one dimension of it. But the other part, the more important question that you asked about critical thinking in our field of work is also going to be impacted because of technology. If a lot of tasks are going to be done by technology, what do I do? Now, business decision making requires critical thinking. Managing people requires critical thinking. You need to be sensitive, you need to be empathetic, you need to be able to literally read the room. Now, an algorithm can't read the room right now. We can. So when you head into a group, when you get a team together, when you talk about culture of an organization, I think all these elements will require us to use all of our human capabilities, including critical thinking. So I think critical thinking is at risk. Those who can maintain it, I think, would be far more successful than those who are over-reliant on technology.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Pranjal. I would agree with you on this. In fact, if I am not wrong, we had this discussion while in Palo Alto as well. So this was the complete same debate that we were having. But
I have to say that maybe three of us have a similar background of age and experience, at least. So perhaps a person in the 20s will probably completely disagree with us and feel that, well, actually, I do more critical thinking because I have grown up playing video games, and I feel far more alive when I'm in a immersive a metaverse kind of atmosphere. I don't know, but I think it'll be good to get some views from some of the younger folks who are often called digital natives.
Oh, yes, without a doubt. We should do that. Like possibly in our next course, Richard, we should have this discussion with the younger.
Yeah.
But Pranjal, just coming back to this very interesting debate and discussion that we're having, one of the points that you alluded to is that, say, people in India are possibly not concerned about privacy, but with the way you're talking about the fifth industrial revolution, you talk about subscription economy, blended, autonomous, or caring, or whatever, there would be a lot of churning of data. And I think we are all, as individuals, will become data points. And that is also going to create a lot of privacy issues. How would we deal with that as humanity, or as people, or as individuals?
I think first there's got to be more awareness. We are, I think, amongst the more aware, but we are in a minority if I look at it from a global perspective. Within India also, as I said, we are more aware. I think even in the legacy economies in Europe, there will be a lot of people who don't really realize the amount of data trail that we are creating. I think data trail and data points are going to be created constantly. The question is, who stores it? How is it stored? How is it used? And how do you ensure that there is no harm which comes to people because of that? Once we are clear on those, and I think the regulators need to make an effort there at the first instance, because nearly every word or every gesture or every action is being captured somewhere or the other. Every single, I would say, nearly every single human activity of a person is leaving a data point which can be tracked, and somebody has it. We don't know who. Now, at some point, if somebody brings all of that together, that's going to be fascinating. So my digital profile will be created. So we talk about digital twins in so many other ways, but a digital data twin is something which is also emerging. Apparently, many of the tech companies, once they know who the user is, they create a file on that person, and that information is there. So it may have only 20% data on me and you right now, but increasingly they will have 20%, 30%, 50% data. So even when you just store photographs on your phone, you will see that the phone and the storage system asks you, can you identify, put a name on this photograph? So that's, once you put a name on a photograph which is saved in your phone, your mobile device, that information will forever connect that face with facial recognition to a name. Now that person can never be anonymous again, right? And this has got, again, it's not about India alone. It's a global change which is taking place. My view, data absolutely at the core of it. How do you protect it? How do you store it? And how do you use it? I think we need urgent global rules on that, which can protect nearly, protect the what is called as personally identifiable information, but also how it is used. It cannot be a monopoly of either the government or the private sector.
And so, Pranjal, like what you're really saying is that this is about rise of the surveillance economy or something of that sort. If that is actually going to be the dominant idea in the future, that will also have an impact on how democracies function. Because like we are talking about businesses, we are talking about nations, but eventually it is also about democracy. It is also about how we will be governed, what is going to happen, how we will be elect our leaders. How do you see these set of ideas creating a transformation for democracies? What about surveillance and how people could actually use this as an idea and possibly control us as well?
I would not say that this is a surveillance economy yet, because surveillance also means that when you are being surveilled without your knowledge or without your agreement, most of the time you're sharing data with our agreement, with full knowledge that my data is available to somebody. Often it's a trade-off. At a gathering, I asked a few people that how many of you would give your personal data to get a free product or a service? And 90% of the people raise their hands because that's a trade-off you make. I'm happy to go into a restaurant to get free Wi-Fi, but give my passwords and mobile device access. That's a very simple form of of sharing your data. The moment the Wi-Fi system has access to your mobile phone, a lot of things could happen, right? If nothing else, your information is available to them. And you add that to your digital transaction to buy a product, that information is there. The person wearing blue shirt and glasses enters, uses Wi-Fi, buys a certain type of coffee, goes back. You have cameras in the restaurant already. You put that person's profile together. This is not surveillance, it's information that I gave up and I willingly entered into that place. The question again is, who is going to keep the data? How is the data going to be used? That data can be weaponized, in which case it is a surveillance economy and it could hurt democracies, or that data could be used in a very constructive way. For example, you could have cameras on traffic patterns. There are cameras, and insurance companies are working with automobile companies to track driver performance. So there are hundreds of sensors in cars, in seats. Now, if you're overweight and if you're driving and something happens, the company can say, well, you were probably not fit and therefore you had an accident and therefore we are not going to give you an insurance claim, right? If you do not drive very well, somebody knows, the car knows that you're not driving well, or it knows that you're driving very well. Now, that is not just surveillance, but it's information that can be used in a very positive way to warn me, look, please don't drive in a terrible way because you are putting yourself and others in harm's way. Or it can be used against me, saying that, well, you brake too hard over there. I don't think you're fit to drive. Or because of the way you took a sharp turn, your insurance premium is going to go up. Now, you could literally take hundreds of examples out of every activity that we have. Staying with insurance, if I'm buying a lot of, food which is considered unhealthy, I may not be able to file a claim for a heart problem with my insurer, because they will say, well, you should just have salad and cheese. You should not be having a lot of the meats and the breads. Now, this impacts the consumer, but as a citizen, there is also so much more. What kind of discussions I get into, what kind of messaging I'm sending, who am I meeting, what kind of conversations I'm having, all that can be tracked. What kind of posts I'm making on social media. One has to be so careful because the whole concept of right to forget is also being debated very fiercely. So it will have an impact on democracy. It will have an impact on consumers. As parents and professionals, it will have an impact. As citizens and consumers, it will have an impact. So we go back to the original question of who keeps the data, how is it safeguarded, who's going to be the guardians of our data.
Richard, do you have a question, or else I'll ask my one final question to Pranjal?
No, I think that I'm just completely in agreement with this. And this trend is happening. It's not one that people can avoid. And those are the key questions to making sure that we move forward in a positive way. Thank you very much, Pranjal. Amit, to you for the final question.
Pranjal, one final question. How do you think we as individuals need to prepare for tomorrow? What are those top 3 things that you would really suggest that we should look at doing or make ourselves or keep ourselves relevant in the future?
I think we'll have to be as professionals and individuals, we will have to be aware that if you think that a lot of change has happened already, we should realize that the change that is ahead of us is going to be far bigger and much faster. First, you have to be aware of that. You cannot assume that, well, I've seen a lot of change, I can survive the next set of changes, because I don't think so. I don't think that any of us can predict what's going to happen in the next 6 months, let alone 1 year or 2 years. That's point 1. Point 2 is, therefore, you have to be ready to change, shift, and pivot. And it's easier said than done, because If you've been doing certain things for a certain time, you don't want to change. But I think our readiness to change has to be very, very high. It may not be easy, it may not even be desirable, but it's imperative that we have to be ready to change. And finally, I think we will have to be very careful about our digital presence. I think our digital presence is something that we tend to take for granted, from the simple information and data sharing in social media to even signing into a device with an email which identifies you. We have come a long way, but the next few years is going to be even more, from our biometrics to our face to every single activity will be recorded. I think the scary part of that is how do you ensure that you do what you want to do in a normal life? How do you live a normal life without having to worry about what the impact is, or having to look, turn and see what's happening behind your shoulder? So I think we'll have to be far more aware of this. So these are the three things we'll have to do as both individuals and professionals.
Thank you, Pranjal. Like, this has been just a stunning discussion, very enlightening. A lot of things to learn. We could have continued for hours on this, and we could have started going deeper into this. But as you know, like, the time's up and all conversations have to come to an end. But I do look forward to engaging with you in the future on such like discussions. And hopefully there is a new book that is coming from your way, and we'll go deeper into that side of the story as well. But special thanks from my side, from Richard's side, for joining us for this India Dialogue conversation, which is actually hosted by the Institute for Competitiveness in US Asia Technology Management Center. Thanks a lot for everybody else, like people who joined. Thank you for joining us today. Next week, August 31, is when we do the next session. And please be logged in, and we look forward to some enlightening sessions in the future as well. Thank you, Pranjal, once again for joining in. It was absolutely a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Thanks to Richard and you for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for your questions.
Thank you.